All right, go ahead, take
By
it
the way,
away.
the topic is building rapport, everybody. So teaching, as we all know, requires a great deal of interpersonal interactions. In fact, it goes without saying that it is quintessentially interpersonal. This aspect of teaching could go easily overlooked, you know. There's even positive research and literature on this matter, often only like focusing on other variables like modes of teaching, ways of testing, techniques, and so on, with the aim of ensuring the effectiveness of the teaching process. So I'm not the first to break this, but building rapport with students could yield substantial effectiveness in teaching and an automatic affinity and harmony in the teacher-student relationship that could never be simply attained by a mere focus on techniques, tests, or teaching modes. All right. So how do we do it? So building rapport is definitely the teacher's only responsibility. It is the teacher's first duty to open up and make the class a little more welcoming to every student and without discrimination. You can't build rapport with one or two students. If you're going to do it, you need to be completely inclusive as much as you can. So if we're going to get to tips, one of the most important points that I deeply instilled in me is that I never look at my class as a conglomeration of students or one whole need tackle. Like is a number of with their personalities, their own characters, and they sometimes require me to adjust them as such. So that itself kind of like sums my whole approach. But there's a number of small, simple things that I never take for granted because they make a huge difference. So I always smile. I never show up with a face, even if I don't feel like being there. So I always smile. It's the first thing I do. I always call my students by their names. I hate using last names. I just think that using names just hits a little closer, so I always use that. One of my favorites is also, I always remember students' interests and stuff they shared about their personal life, their hobbies, and so on. So, for example, towards the end of the summer session, kids were going back to school, and so I would ask them about how that was going. And one of my students with a huge personality, she was about how she hated her new maths teacher. And I was like, why do you hate your new maths teacher? She was like, I think he's a little snobby. So I was very impressed by the use of the word snobby, and so I remember that. The following sessions, I asked her, how are you getting along with your new snobby maths teacher? And she was like, you know what, he's not that bad. And so we all had a laugh. So I always remember stuff about my every student. It's like creating a mental profile for every single one of them. And that is so effective because it shows them that I care, that I'm invested in them, that each one of them is important and matters to me. And that it is also more than just a passing lecture that they have to put up with. All right. And so with all of this being said, I, of course, feel also compelled to share stuff about my personal life. And this is a big thing because I think that showing your personality is one of the most important to building rapport with your students. So, for example, I applied for a visa this year, and they were all aware of the process. And so sometimes I would be late to class, and they all sympathized. And when I told them about my visa, they literally all did like a collective sigh, like oh, and so it was also very memorable. So on this regard, I always try to find relevant current matters to break the ice with. At the beginning of the session, I always tend to have a little casual conversation. And before the meeting, would be like, what are your plans for the rest of the evening? It is a trick I also use to solidify the use of verb tenses, but also more about how the course of my students' day goes. So in short, smile more, be welcoming, crack a joke if you want, interact more than you lecture, and be interested in your students, like genuinely interested. And speaking of lecturing, I always try my best to balance between textbooks and external resources. And I'm so glad I can do that because, as I said, it only makes sense to not be framed by accommodate the aforementioned individualistic nature of the class, if you know what I mean. So students get it from the textbook. Some others need a detailed demonstration that I tailor accordingly. So using external resources tied to the building report that I'm talking about. And on this note, you can use personal examples or even resort to personalized tasks and exercises to make sure everyone gets it their own way. Okay. Another tip that I use is, and I think that this one is very radical in my own opinion, is that from time to time I would talk about the changes I see and the progress each one of them is achieving. I point out the strengths and also the stuff that needs some work. It is so encouraging. It gives them the confidence and makes them set higher expectations for themselves. So I think that those are all the tips that I collected through my teaching experience. And when all is said and done, all I'm trying to say here is that building rapport is a personal competence that is really worth developing for every teacher. It could be a component that really does step up the teaching game. It makes teaching much more easier and makes the students and the teacher want to turn up to class, not to only learn, but to catch up with a friend. So building rapport is like building a space for both the teacher and the student to loosen up, open up, and all while absorbing the info being put out. So, and I can also say that a class could then just be an extension of the students' day that they can enjoy and also like enthuse over. I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Teacher Adnane, for the very interesting talk on how to build rapport with your students and how to make them love you because you're their teacher. I always feel that, as you said, smiling, making them see you more as a friend is definitely yes. Sometimes they know more about my life than I do, and they ask me questions. Did you do this? Did you do that? And I'm like, hey, when did I tell you about that? I don't remember. It was probably the last few weeks that I mentioned it.
Yeah. In a nutshell, it's also like, in a nutshell, also fixes a lot of problems because we're talking about like acting up and stuff. When someone of them is acting up and they know my personality, so they just know that I hate it, so they stop immediately. So it really helps.
Yeah.